Chapter 14. A Slight Stipulation. Rowan stepped on Cythra's toes on his way to the aisle. She grunted slightly, but didn't wisecrack about it. That was because Scythra was too busy going over her weapons and poisons in her head. Rowan's clumsiness was the least of her concerns. She thought they would be led to a room elsewhere in the building, a quiet place for the exam, but other apprentices who had been to conclave before were heading down the aisle toward the open space in front of the rostrum. They lined up in what seemed like no particular order, facing the conclave like a chorus line, so Cythra joined the line next to Rowan. "What is this?" she whispered. "Not sure," he whispered back. There were 8 in total. Some stood with hard expressions, in control of their emotions. Others were trying not to look terrified. Cythra wasn't sure what image she projected, and found herself annoyed that Rowan looked as casual as if he were waiting for a bus. "Honorable Scythe will be the examiner today," Xenocrates said. A hush fell over the chamber as Scythe, the grand dame of death, came forward. She walked down the line of apprentices twice, sizing them up. Then she said, "Each of you will be asked one question. You will have one opportunity to give an acceptable answer." One question? What kind of exam could possibly consist of one question? How could they test anyone's knowledge that way? Cythra's heart beat so violently. She imagined it bursting out of her chest. Then she would find herself waking up in a revival center tomorrow, a laughing stock. Scythe Curie began at the left end of the line. It meant Cythra would be the fourth to be questioned. "Jacory Zimmerman," Scythe Curie said to the gangly boy on the end, "a woman hurls herself on your blade, offering herself as a sacrifice to prevent you from gleaning her child, and dies. What do you do?" The boy hesitated for just an instant, then said, "By resisting the gleaning, she has violated the third commandment. I, therefore, am obliged to glean the rest of her family." Scythe Curie was silent for a moment. Then she said, "Not an acceptable answer." But, said Jacory, "she resisted. The rule says if one resists one's own gleaning. Were she the chosen one, the third commandment would most certainly apply. But if we are even sure, we're obliged to err on the side of compassion. In this case, you would glean the child and arrange for the woman to be brought to a revival center, granting her a year of immunity along with the rest of the family." Then she gestured toward the assembly. "Step down. Your sponsoring Scythe will choose your punishment." Cythra swallowed. Shouldn't the punishment for failure be the awful knowledge of that failure? What sorts of punishments would Scythes devise for their disgraced disciples? Scythe Curie moved onto a strong-looking girl with high cheekbones and a face that looked like it could weather a hurricane. "Claudette Catalino," Scythe Curie said, "you have made a mistake in your poison." "That would never happen," Claudette said. "Do not interrupt me." "But your premise is flawed, Honorable Scythe Curie. I know my poison so well, I could never make a mistake. Ever." "Well," said Curie, with deadpan irony, "how proud your sponsoring Scythe must be to have the first perfect pupil in human history." It brought forth a smattering of chuckles from the room. "All right, then," continued Scythe Curie. "Let us say that someone irritated by your arrogance has sabotaged your poison. Your subject, a man who offered you no resistance, begins to convulse, and it appears that his end will be slow and likely filled with much more pain than his nanites can suppress. What do you do?" And without hesitation, Claudette said, "I draw the pistol that I always keep for emergencies and end the subject's suffering with a single well-placed bullet. But first, I would order any family members to leave the room, sparing them the trauma of witnessing Kabbalistic cleaning." Scythe Curie raised her eyebrows, considering the response, and said, "Acceptable, and thinking of the family is a nice touch, even in a hypothetical." Then she grinned. I'm disappointed I couldn't prove you imperfect. Next was a boy whose gaze was fixed on a spot on the back wall, clearly trying to find his happy place. Noah Zbarsky, said Curie. Yes, Your Honor. His voice quivered. Citra wondered what sort of response that might evoke from Curie. What sort of question might she ask a boy so frightened? Name for me 5 species that generate neurotoxins powerful enough to be effective on a poison-tipped dart. The boy, who had been holding his breath, exhaled with loud relief. Well, Phyllobates of course, better known as the poison dart frog, he said. The blue-ringed octopus, the marbled cone snail, the inland taipan snake, and uh, the the Deathstalker scorpion. Excellent, Scythe said. Can you name any more? Yes, Noah told her. But you said one question. And what if I tell you I've changed my mind and I want 6 instead of 5? Noah took a deep breath but didn't hold it. Then I would tell you in a most respectful way that you were not honoring your word, and a scythe is duty bound to honor their word. Scythe smiled. Acceptable answer. Very good. And then she moved on to Citra. Citra Terranova. She had realized the scythe knew everyone's name, and yet it came as a shock to hear her say it. Yes, Honorable Scythe Curie. The woman leaned in close, peering deeply into Citra's eyes. What is the worst thing you have ever done? Citra was prepared for just about any question but that one. Excuse me? It's a simple question, dear. What is the worst thing you've ever done? Citra's jaw clenched. Her mouth went dry. She knew the answer. She didn't even have to think about it. Can I have a moment? Take your time. Then some random scythe in the audience heckled. She's done so many terrible things, she's having more trouble selecting just one. Laughter everywhere. In that moment, she hated them all. Citra held eye contact with Scythe Grey. Those all-seeing grey eyes. She knew she couldn't back away from the question. When I was 8, she began, I tripped a girl down the stairs. She broke her neck and had to spend 3 days at a revival center. I never told her that it was me. That's the worst thing I ever did. Scythe Curie nodded and offered a sympathetic grin, then said, You're lying, dear. She turned to the crowd, shaking her head perhaps a little bit sadly. An acceptable answer. Then she turned back to Citra. Step down, she said. Scythe Faraday will choose your punishment. She didn't argue. She didn't insist that she was telling the truth, because she wasn't. She had no idea how Scythe Curie knew. Citra went back to her place, unable to look at Scythe Faraday, and he said nothing to her. Then Scythe Curie moved on to Rowan, who seemed so smug. Citra just wanted to hit him. Rowan Damisk, Scythe Curie asked, what do you fear? What do you fear above all else? Rowan did not hesitate in his response. He shrugged and said, I don't fear anything. Citra wasn't sure she heard him right. Did he say he didn't fear anything? Had he lost his mind? Perhaps you want to take some time before answering, Scythe Curie prompted, but Rowan just shook his head. I don't need any more time. That's my answer. Not gonna change it. Absolute silence in the room. Citra found herself involuntarily shaking her head, and then she realized he was doing this for her, so she wouldn't have to suffer alone through whatever punishment was in store, so she wouldn't feel she had fallen behind him. Although she still wanted to smack him, now it was for an entirely different reason. So, said Scythe Curie, today we have one perfect apprentice and one fearless one, she sighed. But I'm afraid that no one is entirely fearless. So, your answer, as I am sure you must know, is unacceptable. She waited, perhaps thinking Rowan might respond to that, but he did not. He just waited for her to say, Step down. Scythe Faraday will choose your punishment. Rowan returned to his place next to Citra, as nonchalant as could be. You're an idiot, she whispered to him. He gave her the same shrug he gave Scythe Curie. Guess so. You think I don't know why you did that? Maybe I did it so that I look better at the next conclave. Maybe I gave too good an answer today. My next question would be harder. But Citra knew it was false, faulty logic. No one didn't think that way. And then Scythe Faraday spoke up, his voice quiet and measured, but somehow carrying an intensity that was chilling. You shouldn't have done that. I'll accept whatever punishment you see fit, Rowan said. It's not about the punishment, he snapped. By now, Scythe Curie had questioned a few more apprentices. One was sent to sit, 2 others stayed. Maybe Scythe Curie will see what I did as noble, Rowan suggested. Yes, and so will everyone else, Faraday said. Motives can easily be beaten into weapons. Which proves, Citra said to Rowan, that you're an idiot. But he only grinned, idiotically. She thought she had the last word on the matter, and that it was over until they returned home, where, no doubt, Scythe Faraday would inflict some annoying but fair punishment that fit the crime. She was mistaken. After the apprentices were done being traumatized, the focus of the Scythes began to wear down. There was now a constant murmur as Scythes discussed dinner plans as the hour approached 7. The remaining business was of little interest to anyone. Issues of building maintenance, and whether or not Scythes would be required to announce the turning of a corner, so it wasn't so shocking when they looked 30 years younger at the next conclave. It was as things were wrapping up that one Scythe stood up and loudly addressed Xenocrates. She was the one dressed in green with emeralds embroidered into her robe, one of Scythe Goddard's bunch. Excuse me, Your Excellency, she began, although clearly she was speaking to the entire assembly, not just the High-Blade. I'm finding myself troubled by this set of new apprentices, more specifically the apprentices taken on by Honorable Scythe Faraday. Both Citra and Rowan looked up. Faraday did not. He seemed frozen, looking downward almost in meditation, or perhaps steeling himself for what was to come. To the best of my knowledge, a Scythe has never taken on 2 apprentices and set them in competition for the rank, she continued. Xenocrates looked over to the parliamentarian who had jurisdiction in such matters. There's no law against it, Scythrand, said the parliamentarian. Yes, Scythrand continued, but clearly the competition has turned into a camaraderie. How will we ever know which is the better candidate if they continue to aid each other? Your complaint is duly noted, said Xenocrates, but Scythrand was not done. I propose that, to ensure this competition is truly a competition, we add a slight stipulation. Scythe Faraday rose to his feet as he lunged from his chair. I object, he shouted. This conclave cannot stipulate how I train my apprentices. It is my sole right to teach them, train them, and discipline them. Rand held up her hands in a gesture of mock magnanimity. I merely seek to make your ultimate choice fair and honest. Do you think you can beguile this conclave with your baubles and vanity? We are not so base as to be dazzled by shiny things. What is your proposal, Scythrand? Asked Xenocrates. I object, shouted Faraday. You can't object to something she has not yet said. Faraday beat down his objection and waited. Citra watched her, feeling almost detached, as if this were a tennis match and it was match point. But she wasn't an observer, was she? She was the ball, and so was Rowan. I propose, said Scythrand, with the sleekness of a death-stalker scorpion, that upon the confirmation of the winner, the first order of business will be for that winner to glean the loser. Gasps and grumbles from around the room, and Citra couldn't believe it. Some laughter and affirmations as well. She wanted to believe the woman in green could not be serious, that this was yet another level of the test. Faraday was so beside himself. He said nothing at first. He couldn't even find the words to object. Finally, he thundered his fury like a force of nature, a wave pounding the shore. This flies in the face of everything we are, everything we do. We're in the business of cleaning, but you and Scythe Goddard and all of his disciples, you would turn this into a blood sport. Nonsense, said Durant. It makes perfect sense. The threat of cleaning will ensure that the best applicant comes out on top. And then, rather than striking it down as ridiculous, to Cytra's horror, Senecratress turned to the parliamentarian. Is there a rule against it? The parliamentarian considered and said, since there is no precedent for the treatment of a double apprenticeship, there are no rules as to how it should be dealt with. The proposal is within our guidelines. Guidelines? Shouted Scythe Faraday. Guidelines? The moral fabric of the Scythedom should be our guidelines. To even consider this is barbaric. Oh, please, said Xenocrates with an exaggerated sweep of his hand. Spare us all the melodrama, Faraday. This is, after all, the consequence of your decision to take on two apprentices when one would have been sufficient. Then the clock began to strike 7 o'clocks. I demand a full debate and vote on this, said Faraday, pleaded, but 3 bells had already rung, and Xenocrates ignored him. As in my prerogative as High Blade, I so stipulate that in the matter of Rowan Damisk and Citra Terranova, whomsoever shall prevail will be required to glean the other upon receipt of his or her ring. Then he banged his gavel heavily upon the rostrum, adjourning conclave and sealing their fate. There are times I long for a relationship with the Thunderhead. I suppose we always want what we can have. Others can call on the Thunderhead for advice, ask it to resolve disputes. Some rely on it as a confidant, for it's known to have a compassionate, impartial ear, and never gossips. The Thunderhead is the world's best listener, but not for sights. For us, the Thunderhead is eternally silent. We have full access to its wealth of knowledge. Of course, the Scythedom uses the Thunderhead for countless tasks, but to us, it's simply a database, a tool, nothing more. As an entity, as a mind, the Thunderhead does not exist for us, and yet it does, and we know it. Estrangement from the collective consciousness of humanity's wisdom is just one more thing that sets Scythes apart from others. The Thunderhead must see us. It must be aware of the Scythedom's pretty vigoring and growing corruption, even though it has pledged non-interference. Does it despise us Scythes, but abides us because it has to, or does it simply choose not to think of us at all? And which is worse, to be despised or to be ignored? From the Gleaning Journal of H.S. Corey. Chapter 15. The Space Between. The night was bleak, and rain streaked the windows of the train, distorting the lights beyond, until the lights were gone. No one knew they were slicing through the countryside now, but the darkness could have been the earliest expense of space. I won't do it, Citra finally said, breaking the silence that had engulfed them since leaving Conclave. They can't make me do it. Faraday didn't say a word, didn't even look at her, so Rowan took it upon himself to answer, yes, they can. Finally Faraday looked to them. Rowan is right, he said. They will find whatever button will make you dance, and dance you will, no matter how hideous the tune. Citra kicked the empty seat in front of her. How could they be so awful, and why do they hate us so much? It's not all of them, Rowan said, and I don't think it's really about us. Clearly, Faraday was a respected Scythe, and although he didn't come out against Goddard today, his feelings about the man were clear. Goddard must see Faraday as a threat. Attacking Rowan and Citra was a warning shot. What if we both fail? Citra suggested. If we're lousy apprentices, then they can choose either of us. And yet, they will. Faraday told her with an authority and finality that left little room for doubt. No matter how poorly you perform, they will still choose one of you, for the spectacle alone. Then he scowled in disgust. And to set the precedent. I'll bet Goddard has enough friends to make sure it happens, said Rowan. I think he has the high blade on his side too. Indeed, Faraday said with a world-weary sigh. Never before have there been so many wheels within wheels in the Scythedom. Rowan closed his eyes, wishing he could close his mind as well and hide from his own thoughts. In 8 months I will be killed by Citra, he thought, or I will kill her. And calling it gleaning didn't change the fact of what it was. He cared for Citra, but enough to surrender his life and let her win. Citra certainly wouldn't back down to let him earn the ring. When he opened his eyes, he caught her staring at him. She didn't look away. Rowan, she said, whatever happens, I want you to know. Don't, Rowan told her. Just don't. And the rest of the ride was silence. Citra, who was not the heaviest sleeper, found herself awake all night after they arrived home. Images of the sights she saw at Conclave filled even the hint of dreams, jarring her back to unwanted wakefulness. The wise ones, the schemers, the compassionate, and those who did not seem to care. Such a delicate charge of espioning the human race should not be subject to the quirks of personality. Sights were supposed to be above the pity, just as they were above the law. Faraday certainly was. If she became a scythe, she would follow his lead, and if she didn't become one, it wouldn't matter, because she'd be dead. Perhaps there was some sort of twisted wisdom in the decision to have one of them gleaned by the other. Whoever wins will begin their life as a scythe in an abject sorrow, never forget the cost of that ring. Morning came with no great fanfare. It was just an ordinary day, like any other. The rain had passed, and the sun peeked from behind shifting clouds. It was Rowan's turn to make breakfast. Eggs and hash browns. He never cooked the potatoes long enough. Hash bales, Citra always called them. Faraday never complained when the meals they made were subpar. He ate what they served, and didn't tolerate complaints from either of them. The punishment for making something barely edible was having to eat it yourself. Citra ate, even though she didn't have an appetite, even though the whole world had slipped off its axis. Breakfast was breakfast. How dare it be? When Faraday broke the silence, it felt like a brick flying through the window. I will go out alone today. The two of you will attend to your studies. Yes, said Faraday, Citra said, with Rowan saying the same in a half-second echo. For you, nothing has changed. Citra looked down into her cereal. It was Rowan who dared to state the obvious. Everything has changed here. And then Faraday said something enigmatic that would only resonate with them much later. Perhaps everything will change again. Then he left them. The space between Rowan and Citra had quickly become a minefield, a dangerous no man's land that promised nothing but misery. It was hard enough to negotiate with Scythe Faraday there, but his absence left the two of them with no one to mediate the space between. Rowan stayed in his room, studying there rather than going into the weapons room, which would feel painfully wrong without Citra sitting with him. Still, he kept his door cracked on the faint hope that she'd want to bridge the distance. He heard her leave, probably for a run, and she was gone for a good long time. Her way of dealing with the dark discomfort of their new situation was to remove herself from it even more completely than Rowan had. After she returned, Rowan knew there would be no peace between them, or within himself, unless he took the first step into that minefield. He stood outside her closed door for at least a full minute before he worked up that nerve to knock. "What do you want?" she asked, her voice muffled by the closed door. "Can I come in?" "It's not locked." He turned the knob and slowly opened the door. She was in the middle of the room with a hunting knife, practicing bladecraft against the empty air, as if battling ghosts. Nice technique, Rowan said, then added, if you're planning on gleaning a pack of angry wolves. A skill is a skill, whether you use it or not. She sheathed the blade, tossed it on her desk, and put her hands on her hips. So, what do you want? I just wanted to say I'm sorry for shutting you down before. On the train, I mean. Citra shrugged. I was babbling. You were right to shut me up. The moment began to get awkward, so Rowan just went for it. Should we talk about this? She turned away from him and sat on her bed, picking up a book on anatomy and opening it as if she was about to start studying. She hadn't yet realized she was holding it upside down. What's to talk about? I kill you or you kill me. Either way, I don't want to think about it until I have to. She glanced at the open book, turned it right side up, and then gave up the charade completely, closing it and tossing it to the floor. I just want to be left alone, okay? Even so, Rowan sat on the edge of her bed, and when she didn't tell him to go, he shifted a little bit closer. She watched him, but said nothing. He wanted to reach for her, maybe touch her cheek, but thinking about that made him think of the saleswoman who was cleaned by a touch. What a perverse poison that was. Rowan wanted to kiss her. There was no denying that anymore. He had suppressed the urge for weeks because he knew it would not be tolerated by the Scythe. But Faraday wasn't here, and the turmoil they had both been hurled into had washed all bets off the table. Then, to his surprise, she suddenly lurched forward and kissed him, catching him completely off guard. There, she said, we've done it. Now it's out of the way, and you can leave. What if I don't want to? And she hesitated, long enough to make it clear that staying was a distinct possibility. But in the end, she said, what good would it do, really, for either of us? She moved farther away on the bed, bringing her knees to her chest. I haven't fallen in love with you, Rowan, and now I want to keep it that way. Rowan got up and moved to the safety of the threshold before turning back to her. It's all right, Citra, he told her. I haven't fallen in love with you either. I am not a man easily brought to fury, but how dare the old guard sides presume to dictate my behavior? Let every one last one of them glean themselves, and we can be done with their self-loathing, sanctimonious ways. I am a man who chooses to glean with pride, not shame. I choose to embrace life, even as I deal death. Make no mistake, we scythes are above the law, because we deserve to be. I see a day when new scythes will be chosen, not because of some esoteric moral high ground, but because they enjoy the taking of life. After all, this is a perfect world, and in a perfect world, don't we all have the right to love what we do? From the Gleaning Journal of H.S. Goddard.